This program aims to find solutions to your medical queries. It seeks answers to common health problems that have been hounding you. We will help you out in finding answers to your medical concerns. Good evening, everyone. I'm Angel Jacob, and this is MedTalk, your weekly on-air health consultation here on 9TV. Dogs have long been man's best friend, but they can be deadly enemies too. For instance, the rabies virus, usually passed on through a dog bite, can be fatal if those at risk are not given the necessary vaccine.
Well, rabies is what we call a zoonotic disease. A zoonotic disease means it's a disease or infection of animals that can be transmitted and suffered by humans. It is an infection or a disease of animals that can be transmitted to humans that causes what we call encephalomyelitis.
In the Philippines, rabies has been a perennial health hazard, accounting up to 300 deaths a year. According to the World Health Organization, the country is among those in the top 10 countries with rabies problems, with 545 cases recorded in 2013.
Rabies is common in the Philippines actually. Every year we see about 300 to 500 cases of human rabies in the country. Worldwide there are about 55,000 cases. Half of them are in Asia, and the Philippines is about number 3 or number 5 in terms of the number of cases.
Around 98% of the cases were traced to rabies-infected dogs, with some minor cases attributed to cats and goats.
In 85% to 90% of all rabies cases in our country, in almost all places of the world, it's the dog that is carrying the virus.
Those who are infected may experience a tingling or burning sensation at the wound area, nausea, vomiting, and others. Though rabies can be deadly for both humans and animals, it is a preventable disease with the right vaccination and proper medical attention.
Rabies is an infection that has no treatment, but it can be prevented. First thing you should do is when you get bitten or licked by an animal is to wash that area with soap and water. Then after that, apply alcohol and put your, example, the betadine or any antiseptic. And of course, next thing is you have to go and visit your doctor or the animal bite centers where vaccination will have to be given.
How is rabies transmitted? What is the correct way to treat an animal bite? Find out the answers tonight on MedTalk. And joining us tonight is Dr. Emelinda Lopez, Rabies Focal Person, Animal Health and Welfare Division of the Bureau of Animal Industry. Also joining us tonight is Dr. Endimion Irvin Tan, an adult infectious disease specialist at the Research Institute for Tropical Medicine or IITM. You may join the discussion by calling our hotline at 548-4678. Good evening, doctors. Welcome to the show.
Good evening.
How would you want to be addressed, Dr. Lopez?
Yes, just call me Doc Mini.
Doc Mini and Dr. Tan?
Andy, Dr. Andy.
Okay, Doc Mini and Doc Andy. Okay. Tonight, it's all about understanding rabies. So first, what is rabies?
Okay, rabies is a viral disease and it is transmitted by the bite of an infected dog. It is a disease of warm-blooded animals. In the Philippines, it's usually attributed to bites from domestic dogs and even cats.
Okay. And what type of animals get rabies? Doc Mimi?
When we say warm-blooded, it can be, aside from dogs and cats, it can be cattle, goats, etc., except, for example, fish or some reptiles. And this can be infected. But usually the Philippines, these are dogs and cats.
So we were all quite familiar that these animals that you've mentioned, get rabies, or can have rabies. Dr. Andy, do humans have rabies as well?
Yeah, actually humans can be affected or we can be infected with rabies. And to add some information regarding what rabies is, so aside from what Dr. has said a while ago, so rabies is a zoonotic infection, so which means we can get it from animals, so which can infect humans. And later on, if the human will be infected, they tend to have infection of the central nervous system or an encephalitic-like disease, so which is 100% fatal. Okay.
And you know, we're not meant to scare, no, but just to educate and inform. And we'd like to know how rabies is transmitted. Doc Mimi.
It is transmitted by the bite of an infected dog. So if the dog bites humans, a tendency, if the one who is bitten doesn't take care of the wound immediately and even consult a doctor, and symptoms appear, clinical signs appear, he will get rabies. Rabies is 100% fatal, but 100% preventable actually.
Okay, so it's fatal at the same time, preventable. Okay, because it is fatal, there is something in the saliva of the rabid animal that makes it fatal. What is it in this saliva, and where does it go, or which body part does it directly go to when one is bitten by a rabid animal?
Okay, so for example, if we have a certain patient who was bitten by a rabid animal, the saliva, okay, of the rabid animal would tend to go into the wound, and then the virus or the rabies virus, if present, would tend to inoculate at the site of the bite. So that virus would tend to ascend or to go up into the central nervous system, so it would transverse into the spinal cord and into the brain finally. So once it reaches the brain, so it would further descend down to cause all the signs and symptoms of rabies, the numbness at the site of the bite. So the patient would go into a furious state, which 70% of the patients would manifest with rabies infection, would manifest as a furious type of rabies, and 30% would manifest as a dumb type of rabies. So if we'll be discussing it a little bit later, so I would tend to differentiate between the two. And to further give some light for our audience, so aside from a bite from an infected animal, we can also have rabies from the saliva of an animal. So the mere fact, if you are licked by an animal or a rabid animal on a non-intact skin, for example, you have an abrasion or you have an open wound, and the wound would be licked by a rabid animal, then that would be also a source of infection for the human.
You mentioned licked or being bitten, scratched
Scratch
as well.
also.
How about the feces of a rat? Does that have rabies, like the bubonic plague, no?
The bubonic plague, yeah, it is caused by another organism. So rat per se, so we have the house rats, okay, that we have at home, those pests. Actually, rats are not known to be rabid. So if you be having a patient, so usually at our ITM, we tend to have patients coming and say that, Doc, magpapabakuna ako ng anti-rabies because nakagat ako ng rat. So that patient was bitten by a rat. So to correct their misconception, so I would say na, hindi niyo po kailangan magpa-anti-rabies because rats per se, house rats, do not have rabies virus, or they do not get infected with rabies actually. So we do not give you anti-rabies vaccine for rats.
So how do you appease the patient who comes to you na gusto magpa anti-tetanus siya? Is that
yes,
possible?
precisely, Ms. Angel. So we give anti-tetanus vaccine for those patients who are bitten by rats.
You mentioned, Dr. Andy, the signs of an animal that has rabies. Can you please expound on that?
Okay, sure, no problem. So if a certain animal is rabid, actually there are some misconceptions actually. Sometimes they would say na, lahat ng dog bites, lahat ng dog would be rabid.
Yes.
No, actually I always tell or educate my patients that this particular dog who would be rabid would just play into a role or would just assume a significant role if it has beaten a human, they say. Because if this certain animal is rabid and it will just rot and die away, and it has not inflicted harm to a certain human, then we won't be caring if the dog dies or not. But if this certain rabid dog would inflict harm on the human. So for example, if it has bitten a human, then that's the time the dog would play a significant role in the event, because we tend to observe the dog for 14 days. So if that certain dog would die after 14-day period of observation, and then we would subject the dog into further laboratory tests, and we can say if this certain dog is rabid or not. So we, not all cases of dog bites nagiging rabid. So it depends on the type of dog and on the behavior and on how you observe and treated the dog actually for the 14-day observation period.
Okay, so if the dog is observed for 14 days and it has bitten a human, how many days should the human be observed, Doc Mimi?
Dogs or
the dogs, yes.
It's the usual practice is 14 days, and you have to look for clinical signs, mostly nervous signs, change of behavior. A dog which once was aggressive became very meek or silent, and also those dogs who are very friendly become very aggressive, or they are listless, or they move around, or they have nervous signs. So change of behavior is one. Also, there's also a tendency for being fear of water too, hydrophobic.
How about physically? Is there some manifestation that the dog is rabid?
Yes, it can bark a lot or have some excessive salivation. It doesn't move or is quiet in a corner. Sometimes it's extremes. They tend to be very, very physical and moving around in their cage.
Basta it's not the normal behavior of your beloved pet.
Yes,
diba? You'll
you
know
know
naman
the
the normal
behavior.
behavior. Pag medyo na iba na yan, there's something already going on with that.
Something different.
Something very
queer
different.
and strange going on.
Should you, before we cut to a break, should you keep the pet in your home for 14 days when one is observing the animal?
The important thing is that when you observe the animal, it is isolated, if possible caged, and away from other animals, pet dogs, for example, or even cats, while it's still being in the 14-day observation period.
Okay, so Doc Andy and Doc Mimi, to all our viewers, we'll talk more about rabies when MedTalk returns. According to the World Health Organization, around 29 million individuals get a post-exposure vaccination to thwart the disease, with a cost amounting to $2.1 billion. We're back here on MedTalk, still talking about rabies. You may join the discussion by calling our hotline at 548-4678. Dr. Andy, Doc Mimi, before we cut to the break, we were talking about a dog being bitten by a rabid dog. Now, what if a human is bitten? Is there a 14-day grace period as well? What should one do as soon as he is bitten by a dog?
Okay. Right. So since I'm an infectious disease specialist in training, so if a person would be bitten by a rabid dog or whatever animal it would be, like a dog, a cat, and if we're not sure if that certain animal is rabid or not, of course, I would always err on the side of being safe rather than you're late. So I would really encourage that certain person or that patient to consult us, okay, to have their post-exposure prophylaxis. So speaking of post-exposure prophylaxis, I think the audience would like to know. So first, after seeing a patient who was bitten by a dog or by a cat, so we have to learn how to categorize each injury. So basically, we have three categorizations. We have the category 1. So cat 1 or category 1 would be lick on an intact skin. Category 2 would be lick on an uncovered or a wounded skin, or we have an abrasion, and then the animal would lick that wound, so it is already a category 2. Or any injury without spontaneous bleeding. So for example, you were lacerated, you were scratched by the animal's claw, and then it has no spontaneous bleeding, category 2. But the laypersons or the audience would ask, Doc, parang dumugo naman siya. Of course, it is a wound.
Yeah.
All wounds would tend to have bleeding.
Yes.
But after washing the area, and if you will ask the patient, piniga mo ba yung wound? So if the patient would induce the bleeding, tsaka siya dumugo, that's category 2.
Okay.
Okay? But for category 3 na bites or injury from animals, there has to be a spontaneous bleeding. For example, the injury would be so deep, it is a transdermal form of injury, masyado siyang malalim. So it would bleed spontaneously. Even though without squeezing, without inducing the bleeding, it would bleed spontaneously. So that's category 3. However, there are some exceptions, okay? For bites on the neck and the face area,
Yes.
irregardless of how severe the injury would be, maski na abrasion lang without spontaneous bleeding, category 3 agad. Upgraded siya, category 3.
Kahit aso mo pa mismo yung kumbaga. I've been bitten by my dog twice and another dog. It depends ba on the body part na kinagat?
Actually, it depends dun sa body part. Kasi even though it is just a minor na abrasion, but it is located sa my neck and the facial area, automatic it's category 3, Miss Angel.
So why do you have to wash the wound right away? They say it's to remove the saliva of the
Yeah.
dog. Harsh detergent?
Harsh detergent, not really that
No,
harsh.
not that harsh. Okay, so soap and water.
Soap and water would do.
Okay.
Actually, the pathophysiology behind that is because rabies virus, again, is a lysovirus, okay? So it is a type of virus that is very sensitive to sunlight, very sensitive to detergent, okay? So ibig sabihin, the gold standard for proper wound care after an exposure, for example, you were bitten, the very first step is proper wound care. Okay, so you have to wash the area with free-flowing water. It has to be water coming from a faucet. Okay, so we have to have a faucet with free-flowing water, and then you have to wash the area for the audience with soap and water. Okay, the audience would sometimes say, "How about garlic? How about stones?
Or
sip,
like,
sip,
herbs."
Or herbs? No, I would not suggest that. Simply wash it with soap and water. Then that's the very first step that you have to do. Then you've asked me a while ago, how about for humans? Do we observe the humans? No, we err on the side of being safe rather than late because we don't want to pass the point of no return.
Okay.
So we would encourage the patient to undergo a series of treatment. So it is what we call the post-exposure prophylaxis. For the post-exposure prophylaxis, they should have 4 visits. In RITM, we practice the intradermal. Intradermal is yung in-inject under the skin. Okay, so they should have 4 visits. The initial visit will be considered day 0. The second visit is day 3, day 7, then day 28. So after giving the 3 shots, the day 7, so the animal has to be observed for 14 days. If the animal would survive the 14-day observation period, then the day 28, we can safely omit it. Okay?
Okay. This is assuming that you know the animal, or the
who
pet
had
owner
bitten
who had
you.
bitten you.
Yeah.
If you do not know the animal who has bitten you, for example, an aspen or
Aspin, yeah, that's a
yes.
new term that they use.
Yes,
actually.
that's the more politically correct term I understand
Yeah.
these
Kasi
days.
bawal na tayo yung askal eh. So aspin na daw.
Asong Pinoy,
Yeah.
yes. So if you do not know the dog that has bitten you, you cannot observe
You
the
cannot.
dog. You have to get all shots.
All shots.
All at the
You
same
have to
time.
get a day 28 shot, 4
Day 28.
visits at the clinic.
Okay.
And each visit would have 2 vaccinations, okay? The right and the left. 2 intradermal routes of vaccination.
Every visit.
Every visit.
That's the rabies shot and the anti-tetanus.
That's the rabies, excluding the anti-tetanus. The anti-tetanus, on the first visit, you can give the tetanus toxoid, okay? But on the first visit, if you'll be giving the tetanus toxoid, it will be the 3rd shot. Kasi
Okay.
for the rabies vaccine per se, it is a 2-shot regimen for each visit.
So
But-
once you're bitten, you should just rush
should.
right away to
You
your
really
healthcare
should.
center,
Healthcare
RITM,
center,
or the
animal
nearest
body
hospital.
clinic,
Or the nearest hospital. Okay. Doctors, we have myths surrounding rabies, or you know, in trying to understand rabies, we have a couple of myths that we would like to ask you to clear off. Myth number 1: all dogs are born with rabies.
True or false?
True or false? Yeah. Is it
False.
a myth?
Definitely not.
It's false.
Kawawa naman if you assume that all dogs that are born have
Yeah,
rabies.
it's false.
Dito to.
They're too much accused.
Oh yeah, let's not do that to those poor puppies. For example, the mother or the father has rabies. will they pass it on to their puppies?
They'll be dead by then.
They'll be dead by then.
They will have
Okay.
no more puppies.
Okay, all right. Myth number 2, puppies are more rabid than adult dogs.
It doesn't matter.
Yeah, no. True or false? False.
Okay.
Yeah,
Basta a dog, whether a puppy or an adult.
Equally
Yeah.
vulnerable to
Pareho.
having rabies infection.
Same.
Same also with cats.
Yeah.
With cats and other animals that we have here in the country. Cats, dogs that have
Cats,
rabies, goats,
dogs,
Yes, goats.
Goats.
Even goats. Yung mga farm animals
bats.
then.
Do our bats here have
Yes, they
rabies?
are
Bats, yeah.
reservoirs.
In fact, bats do carry a lot of diseases.
Okay. We'll talk about that in a while. We'll finish the
Okay,
myths
sure.
first. Doc Andy, thank you. Myth number 3, human-to-human transmission is not possible. So if a human is bitten by a rabid dog, and maybe the saliva of the human is transferred to someone who has a cut,
Indeed.
yeah, is that
So
Pwede ba yan?
regarding that question,
yes?
that's a false. Because
False.
human-to-human transmission, yeah, it's possible. For example, if I would attend to a rabid patient and I am not pre-vaccinated, and that the patient's saliva, okay, would just squirt into my eye,
Yes.
my lips, or any mucous membrane, then I would get a chance to be infected with rabies.
You know what? I was watching the news the other day. They were at camp, and the guy was bitten by a bat.
A bat.
And then he went to the doctor right away. But prior to that, it was a far ride. So the girlfriend cleaned the wound, and she also had to get a shot. That's human-to-human transmission. When cleaning a wound of, let's say, a bat bite or maybe even a dog bite, and you're not able to go to the doctor right away.
Cleaning the wound, yeah, it's okay. But regarding the exposure, I think if both of them are in the camp, and if you'll be reading textbooks of infectious diseases, if you slept in a room and then upon waking up you saw a bat inside your room, regardless if you have an objective finding of a bite or not, the mere fact of seeing the bat inside your room, it is an indication that you really have a post-exposure treatment.
Okay, all right. Myth number 4, if I'm not mistaken. Foaming at the mouth is a sure sign of rabies. Doc Mimi, you mentioned some
That's
signs.
false.
It's not a sure
necessarily that.
Okay, it's not okay. So what is a sure sign? Is there a sure sign that the dog is rabid?
It's a combination of the history, especially vaccinated or not, as well as the clinical signs, which are usually nervous signs.
Okay. Myth number 5. Rabies is transmitted only by a bite of an animal.
False.
Okay.
Because a lick can transmit
And a scratch.
an infection. And
Yes.
a scratch.
Could I qualify that? Bite of
please.
an infected animal.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah,
rabies
yeah.
is transmitted only by a bite of an infected animal.
Yes.
Okay. How about droppings of the bat?
Bat droppings, not so much. However, the mere fact of seeing a bat inside your room, or if you're exposed, I think it would be more prudent to have a post-exposure prophylaxis too.
Okay, basta when in doubt, get the
When in doubt,
post-exposure
get a shot.
prophylaxis right away. Call your doctor. Twitter question, doctors. My pet dog came from a fight with a neighbor's dog, and I saw that he was producing excessive saliva. Is this a sign of rabies?
Not
Doc Mimi.
necessarily, because when dogs fight, they usually have some salivation too. The same way when they salivate, when they're happy or drooling all over. So this should be verified by history as well as if the dog is vaccinated or not.
Okay, what should the pet owner do immediately? Is there an emergency?
First of all, the dog which has been bitten should undergo the usual 2-week observation period away from other dogs in the household. And it's important that they look for the clinical signs of these animals. And if the dog dies within the 14-day period, the animal should be brought to the nearest rabies diagnostic lab. We have one here at the Philippine Animal Health Center in Quezon City, Visayas Avenue, where the head should be examined for a definitive diagnosis of rabies.
Okay. Doctors, this time a Facebook question. I noticed that symptoms of rabies are quite similar to meningitis. How do you diagnose or how do you differentiate between the two?
Meningitis, okay. Actually, the causes of meningitis would be multifactorial. It can be because of a tuberculosis in origin, a viral, a bacterial, or even a fungal, okay? It can cause meningitis. But from the name itself, meningitis is infection of the covering of the brain and spinal cord. However, with rabies, it is an infection of the brain and the spinal cord itself. It is an infection of the CNS. However, meningitis is the infection of the covering of the CNS. So basically, the pathophysiology would be somewhat different, actually. Meningitis, we can have it if there's bacterial infection, for example, inside the ear, or the middle ear.
Yes.
So if untreated, it can travel through the bloodstream, then go into the covering of the brain, causing you meningitis. Regarding the Facebook question, the signs and symptoms, actually, the signs and symptoms would not be that specific. However, in patients with meningitis, they would complain of a rigid neck, masakit ang batok, very rigid neck, okay? So if we'll get a lumbar tap or get a sample of the spinal fluid, it will be very high pressure, actually. So for a rabies patient, actually, it will be very difficult for us to get yung lumbar tap or specimen because per se, a rabies patient would be very aggressive, actually, if it is of a fierce type. So the signs and symptoms not really in a par, masyado. Okay.
Kasi sometimes a rabid animal can manifest seizure, and in meningitis, seizures are also common.
Yeah, you can.
Okay.
In fact, the signs and symptoms will be very myriad, okay? So you'll have a protein manifestation, actually, iba-iba.
Iba-iba talaga. Okay, doctors, we'll talk more about meningitis. Rabies.
Rabies.
We'll talk more about rabies when MedTalk returns. We're back here on MedTalk, still talking about rabies. You may join the discussion by calling our hotline at 548-4678. Doc Andy,
Hello.
Doc Mimi. Doc Andy, do we only have to get a shot when we're bitten?
Not necessarily, because we have what we call the pre-exposure prophylaxis, okay? So for pre-exposure prophylaxis, especially for high-risk group of people, if you're a veterinarian, if you work in an infectious disease hospital, and you're not sure who among your patients have rabies or not, and then you are mandatory to have a pre-exposure prophylaxis. So what is a pre-exposure prophylaxis? The audience would like to know. So pre-exposure prophylaxis is bakuna bago ka makagat o bago ka magkaroon ng contact with a rabid animal. Pre-exposure, from the root word pre. So how do we give the pre-exposure prophylaxis? Kasi iba isipin nila, naku, pag bakuna for rabies, napakadaming saksak yan, okay? So for pre-exposure prophylaxis, that person would be subjected to 3 visits lang. Each visit, only 1 site of injection, okay? So, ano lang siya? So, day 0, day 3, and then the day 28. So, 3 shots lang siya, okay? That's a pre-exposure prophylaxis. But for a post-exposure prophylaxis, like what I've said a while ago, 4 visits. And each visit would have 2 sites na injection. Day 0, day 3, day 7, and the day 28. So yun yung difference niya.
Okay, but the vaccination is the same.
The
for
drug,
post
that's
and
the
pre,
same.
the drug is
That's
the
the same. We use a verocell-derived vaccine, or yung PVRV,
Okay.
or from the chick embryo, from chick manok,
Okay.
PCEC. So we have the PVRV or the PCEC. So we use the same drug. Either the PCEC or the PVRV pwede siya. For a post-exposure and a pre-exposure, we use the same.
Are there side effects?
Side effects,
Do
actually...
you get fever when you have
Yeah,
these
sometimes,
shots?
just like any form of vaccination, they tend to have a localized itchiness, fever, or parang
Heaviness.
erythema.
And then-
Heaviness, not that, not the common, actually. But sometimes they will have localized erythema it's just like a bite from a mosquito actually, but it will
Okay.
just resolve spontaneously.
Okay. Talk, Mimi, for the your pet or an animal for that matter. Is there such a thing as just like what Doc Andy mentioned, pre and post? At what ages should the dogs be vaccinated?
Yes, just like babies, they have regular shots. And for rabies, prevention is the only shot
Okay.
because rabies is fatal. So this is given ideally at 3 months age, 3 months of age, and especially if the mother or of the dog is not vaccinated. If they're worried about the pup having rabies, they can have it as early as 1 month. But ideally, it's 3 months, so they get the full immunity, then repeated yearly. Since rabies is endemic in the Philippines, it's important that we have regular vaccination of the animal, and it should be completed yearly.
How is this coming along in each in the barangays or in each province? How is this coming along, Doctor, in the vaccinating the dogs?
Yes, we are trying to make the people in the communities aware of rabies, that it is a fatal animal disease, and the only way to prevent is through vaccination. So the government is now embarking on mass rabies dog vaccination, and this is usually through the local government units which give this vaccination. Our rabies vaccine is free, but they charge for registration for the local government. And it's important that the pet owner keep a vaccination certificate or record of the shots, so he knows that it is regularly being vaccinated.
And once there's regular vaccination, then once you're bitten and you know it's within that year that the dog has been vaccinated, do you still need to get another vaccination, another shot?
I always tell my patient, for example, if a patient would come to me, Doc, nakagat ako ng dog, I was bitten by a dog. So I would ask, have you had a post-exposure or vaccination regimen given to you before? So if the patient would say, no, wala pang history of vaccination, how about the dog? Has the dog been vaccinated? If the patient would tell me, yes, doc, na-vaccinate yung dog. But again, I always say that I believe in what I see, but I do not believe in what I hear. Kasi they might claim that the dog was vaccinated, so I should have a written documentation or charting that the dog has been vaccinated. So if it is within the period, 1 year period, and then hindi pa nag-lapse, okay, yung 1 year na vaccination dog, then pwedeng hindi. But again, guidelines are there to guide us because the involved party is a human. So I will always, again, err on the side of being safe rather than late. So we tend to overkill. So I, per se, would tend to vaccinate the human.
Again, even if nakagat siya within that 1 year period na na-vaccinate yung dog.
I would
Better
suggest
safe
that.
than
Better
sorry,
to
no?
be safe.
Okay. Doctors, we have a Facebook question. How long will a rabies vaccine work?
Okay.
So that 1 year period, Doc Mimi?
Yes.
The effectivity is just 1 year?
Yes, the vaccine actually lasts from a minimum of 1 to 3 years actually.
Okay.
But the idea is that we give the vaccination because rabies is rampant in the Philippines, it's endemic. So we need to have regular or high level of immunity in the animals.
Okay. So the regular vaccination talagang, you know, not only for responsible pet owners, yung mga aspin again, no, that on the street, responsibility of the community to get them vaccinated.
Yes, it's very important that especially from the local government, the Office of the Provincial or City Veterinarians, they have a significant role in terms of informing the community of awareness of the rabies, and also to make sure that the owners vaccinate their dogs. And this should be a community undertaking, such that all of the dog population there will be safe from rabies.
How about for humans?
For humans.
For example, you're just thinking of getting a pet. Or you know, it's the first day of your pet at home.
Okay.
Or the first week. Should you get yourself vaccinated already?
It will be better that you get a pre-exposure prophylaxis. Actually, you have different risk stratification. For higher risk group of patients like veterinarians, like what I've said.
Yes.
So veterinarians, doctors in infectious disease hospitals, they are mandatory to have a pre-exposure prophylaxis. And you know that rabies vaccine is a very antigenic form of vaccine. It means to say, once you have a complete set of vaccination, for example, I had a complete set of pre-exposure vaccination. If I will get bitten by a dog, okay, and then no matter how severe the wound is, it's a face, it's a neck, I will just need a booster shot. A booster shot is just a 2-shot regimen. Day 0, day 3. And each visit isang site lang, isang tusok lang. And because the rabies vaccine is very antigenic, it would produce an anamnesic effect. Ibig sabihin, it will trigger the memory inside the body. So yung titer, the antibody titer would shoot up very, very high. So it is one of the most antigenic vaccines that we have so far, actually. So booster shot.
Booster shot. So in children, is it also advised na
Yes, actually, we treat
adults and children?
We treat animal bites equally for adults and children. That's why in RITM, no matter what age group that patient belongs to, so we treat them as the same. Neonate, toddler, adolescent, adult, senile group, we treat it all the same.
You all have to get those shots.
Yes.
And to complete those shots. You all have to get them and complete them. Doctors, we have a Twitter question. Do you have to take, or do you have to have a vaccination against rabies if a vaccinated dog bites you? We were talking about this earlier.
Yes, that's earlier.
Okay, so yes. No?
Yeah, to be safe.
To be safe. Okay. What if you haven't gotten any shot, those shots that the pre-exposure shot, and then you are bitten, and then that's the only time you get all those shots? It's still okay.
Yes,
you're still going to be okay.
You're going to be okay as long as you catch the patient early. That's why I do not want to have a golden period of observation for the humans. Once you have been bitten by a dog, whether it is a rabid or non-rabid dog, you should get the post-exposure shots. So each post-exposure shot, again, would be a 2-site regimen, okay? But I think the audience might wonder, ano naman yung tinutusok into the wound? They might say na, parang before they were
I think you mentioned, Doc, before we cut to a break, no? Ano yung tinutusok sa wound? So, as there are shots here, and then, if, for example, you're bitten on your hand, doon tinutusok yung vaccine, or yung anti-tetanus shot?
Okay, it goes like this. Isn't it that we have this classification? So we have a category 3. Category 3, those are very severe injuries. So yung mga kusang nag-bleed, spontaneously bleeding. So for spontaneously bleeding wounds, category 3 wounds, aside from the 2 shots na anti-rabies, they should get an immunoglobulin, a rabies immunoglobulin vaccination. It is a passive form of vaccination. Ibig sabihin, meron siyang passive immunity. It already contains the antibody. That is why we have to inject it into the wound.
Yes.
But it is very expensive. However, again, it is a mortal sin not to inject or not to infiltrate that immunoglobulin into the site of the injury, because you want to neutralize the rabies virus if present.
Okay, because the saliva may have penetrated there.
Precisely.
I was bitten by my dog here, and that's what they did.
Yeah,
they injected the wound. We'll talk more about rabies. We'll talk more about, we'll also get to understand the Anti-Rabies Act of 2007. All that and more when MedTalk returns. According to the World Health Organization, rabies is evident in more than 150 countries, with around 60,000 fatalities each year, mostly from Africa and Asia. We're back here on MedTalk, still talking about rabies. This time, doctors, we have a question here. Will the rabies virus travel faster to the brain if you get bitten in the neck or the face? You know what? I'd like to share with everyone. I was bitten by my dog. It was New Year's. Maybe he was, di ba, parang natataranta na sila and they're all...
When the New Year.
The New Year with the
excited,
noise. I was bitten here. And he had just had his rabies shot. But I called the doctor right away to get a tetanus shot. Why do we have to get a tetanus shot if it's in this area?
Okay. Actually, it's not just a tetanus shot. If you're a virgin case, which means to say if you have not received any form of vaccination for rabies before, and the bite is in the neck or in the head area, so the proximity is nearer to the brain. So the distance for the virus to travel would be shorter into the brain. So mas malapit siya sa brain. So it is really more dangerous actually the case scenario will be like that. So it is not just giving the anti-tetanus. So for bites on the neck and the face area, aside from the anti-rabies vaccination and the anti-tetanus vaccination, the patient should have an immunoglobulin infiltrated into the site of the bite. So regarding the question, mas nakakatakot ba? Yes, because it is nearer to the brain.
Pag ang dalawang aso naman ang nag-away and then the dog, or the victim is bitten in the same area, the head up, does the dog who has been bitten need a shot as well? Or how is this, Doc Mimi? Observation of the victim and the aggressor?
The usual routine again is the observation of the dog. We don't give shots at that time. We have to observe the dog, and also to submit the head of the dog or the whole dog to the lab for their definitive laboratory test.
So this is assuming the dog
more so if the dog is unvaccinated.
There's this you mentioned before we discussed the Anti-Rabies Act of 2007. There's a 10-day period or 14-day period that the dog is observed. There's this thing called viral shedding. What exactly is viral shedding when you observe the dog for rabies?
At the moment, first of all, in the observation period, it's important to see if the virus, the rabies virus, has already infected the animal. So with the clinical signs present, it is most likely to have the animal rabies within it. So one important thing is that this is to confirm also the presence of the rabies virus in the brain of the animal to check if it's really infected.
Okay, so talagang this infection, as we've mentioned from the beginning, is really fatal. Should be monitored talaga, and as a human, you should be how do you call that? Responsible. As a pet owner, you should be cautious. You should alert your doctor right away.
Self-awareness.
Okay. And in being aware, in self-awareness, we should also be aware of the Anti-Rabies Act of 2007. Please enlighten us on this, Doc Mimi.
Yes, the Anti-Rabies Act or Republic Act 9482 is our mandate for the prevention, control, and eventual elimination of rabies. Here, it specifies the responsibilities of government agencies, especially the Department of Agriculture, Department of Health, Department of Interior and Local Government, even the Department of Education, and other stakeholders in their role to prevent rabies. Here, we also mentioned the creation of the National Rabies Prevention and Control Program, headed or managed by the National Rabies and Prevention Control Committee. And this, the agencies I mentioned are mostly the members of this committee. There are also some things that the pet owners should also know about their responsibilities, and even there are penalties or fines for certain practices in relation to having responsible pet ownership. For example, if you're caught without a leash outside your house, and the dog is and your dog is outside the house, you'll find 500 pesos per incident. Even, for example, refusing to have the dog subjected to observation period or the medical treatment of the the person who was bitten, there's also a penalty for this. And it could reach up to 25,000 pesos.
Wow, so you should really know your responsibilities as a pet owner and be more mindful of the behavior of your pet, no? With the leash and then the vaccines as well. One more question, doctor. Why do some people who get bitten by rabid animals only show symptoms of infection after a couple of years?
Oh yes,
Yes,
indeed.
that's true. Yeah.
This is very true actually, because the incubation period from the time of exposure, from the time the patient was bitten by the infected animal, so it can manifest within 2 weeks, 3 weeks, or even years after the onset of the bite.
Okay.
So we really have to be very cautious and have a self-awareness that once we were bitten, especially by an unknown animal, we do not know the status of that animal, so we really have to subject ourselves for a post-exposure prophylaxis.
Okay.
Again, rabies has no cure, but it has a
Okay.
preventive management.
Okay. Rabies has no cure, but it is,
But it is preventable.
preventable. Okay. Other treatment options available? You've mentioned shots.
Shots,
But for example, are the shots expensive?
The shots are really not that expensive actually. In our ITM, actually we have an annual bite clinic. So it operates Mondays to Fridays, office hours, 8 to 5 p.m. So we receive a lot of patients. If I say a lot, there's really a lot. More than 100 patients per day. The shots are not that expensive because if you have a lot of patients, so ang kailangan lang for each patient will be a 0.1. 0.1 cc is so minute in amount. Sobrang konti niya.
Okay.
So if you have a cohort of patients here, so they tend to share a single vial of vaccine.
Okay.
So expensive, it is not that expensive.
Okay.
So we really advocate or encourage them to have their shots given before it's too late talaga. No?
Oo. Okay,
Not that
so-
expensive. The thing that's very expensive is the immunoglobulin.
Yes.
Sobrang expensive.
Oo. But to those who need it, kailangan talagang
They really
i-administer
have.
yung immunoglobulin.
But the first line, we have the equine in origin, or yung galing sa horse, equine horse, okay? And we have one, is a human, okay? So yung equine is a little bit cheaper, but we have to do a skin test if the
Okay.
patient has an allergy or not.
Eh kung emergency na.
Kung emergency pa rin, it's not really that emergency that you really have to give it at this minute or else the patient would die. So we can observe the patient during the skin test, and then if it shows a positive skin test, ibig sabihin the patient might have an allergy dun sa equine or dun sa horse na immunoglobulin, then we give them the human form. More expensive than an equine in origin
Okay.
of immunoglobulin.
Pero there's no amount that can equal your life.
Yes.
So talagang kailangan, kung yun ang kailangan na shot,
Incomparable.
yun talaga, incomparable. Doctors, last September 28, it was World Rabies
Rabies
Day,
Day,
last
yes.
Sunday. And the Philippines in 2020 is aiming for
Rabies-free.
rabies-free Philippines. Doc Mimi, where are we in this campaign? How are we doing in the Philippines when it
Yes,
comes to eradicating rabies?
The Philippines has a goal of eliminating rabies, both animal and human, in 2020. We are now in the process of accelerating it through mass dog vaccination, as well as concentrations on information, education, and communication, recognition of the disease, and responsible pet ownership. This is quite important because in the ASEAN, we are also targeting 2020 to have rabies-free ASEAN. So we are harmonizing our efforts towards that.
So thank you very much, Doc Mimi, for educating all of us on rabies-free Philippines in 2020. Final message, such a short final message to all our viewers, please.
Rabies is a preventable disease. So we hope that pet owners should have their dogs vaccinated, and also to practice responsible pet ownership in order to have healthy and happy dogs, and then we will have lesser rabies or no rabies in the near future.
Okay, thank you very much. A short message, Dr.
Okay,
Tan?
sure. So for those high-risk group of people or yung mga nakagat ng dog, do not hesitate. Visit RITM or any animal bite centers or clinics, then have your post-exposure prophylaxis or pre-exposure shots given.
Okay.
Because again, rabies is preventable, but it has no cure. You don't want to pass the point of no return, and it's too late.
Okay, so it's never too late to get information from MedTalk, and from the two of you, Doc Mimi and Doc Tan. Thank you so much for educating all of us, and thank you for your time.
You're welcome.
Thank you also to those who tweeted and sent their questions via Facebook. We'll see you again next Tuesday, 7 p.m. here on MedTalk, your scheduled on-air consultation here on 9TV. This is Angel Jacob. Good night.
Of warm-blooded animals. In the Philippines, it's usually attributed to bites from domestic dogs and even cats.
Okay. And what type of animals get rabies? Doc Mimi?
When we say warm-blooded, it can be, aside from dogs and cats, it can be cattle, goats, etc., except for example fish or some reptiles, and this can be infected. But usually the Philippines, these are dogs and cats.
So we were all quite familiar that these animals that you've mentioned get rabies, can have rabies. Dr. Andy, do humans have rabies as well?
Yeah, actually humans can be affected or can be infected with rabies. And to add some information regarding what rabies is, so aside from what Dr. has said a while ago, so rabies is a zoonotic infection, so which means we can get it from animals, so which can infect humans. And later on, if the human will be infected, they tend to have infection of the central nervous system or an encephalitic-like disease, so which is 100% fatal. Okay.
And you know, we're not meant to scare, no, but just to educate and inform. And we'd like to know how rabies is transmitted. Doc Mimi.
It is transmitted by the bite of an infected dog. So
Transmitted to humans that causes what we call encephalomyelitis.
In the Philippines, rabies has been a perennial health hazard, accounting up to 300 deaths a year. According to the World Health Organization, the country is among those in the top 10 countries with rabies problems, with 545 cases recorded in 2013.
Rabies is common in the Philippines actually. Every year we see about 300 to 500 cases of human rabies in the country. Worldwide, there are about 55,000 cases. Half of them are in Asia. And the Philippines is about number 3 or number 5 in terms of the number of cases.
Around 98% of the cases were traced to rabies-infected dogs, with some minor cases attributed to cats and goats.
In 85% to 90% of all rabies cases in our country, in almost all places of the world, it's the dog that is carrying the virus.
Those who are infected may experience a tingling or burning sensation at the wound area, nausea, vomiting, and others. Though rabies can be deadly for both humans and animals, it is a preventable disease with the right vaccination and proper medical attention.
Rabies is an infection that has no treatment, but it can
This program aims to find solutions to your medical queries. It seeks answers to common health problems that have been hounding you. We will help you out in finding answers to your medical concerns. Good evening, everyone. I'm Angel Jacob, and this is MedTalk, your weekly on-air health consultation here on 9TV.
Dogs have long been man's best friend, but they can be deadly enemies too. For instance, the rabies virus, usually passed on through a dog bite, can be fatal if those at risk are not given the necessary vaccine.
Well, rabies is what we call a zoonotic disease. A zoonotic disease means it's a disease or infection of animals that can be transmitted and suffered by humans. It is an infection or a disease of animals that can be transmitted.
So if the dog bites humans, a tendency if the one who is bitten doesn't take care of the wound immediately and even consult a doctor, and symptoms appear, clinical signs appear, he will get rabies. Rabies is 100% fatal, but 100% preventable actually.
Okay, so it's fatal at the same time,
Preventable.
preventable. Okay, because it is fatal, there is something in the saliva of the rabid animal that makes it fatal. What is it in this saliva, and where does it go, or which body part does it directly go to when one is bitten by a rabid animal?
Okay, so for example, if we have a certain patient who was bitten by a rabid animal, the saliva, okay, of the rabid animal would tend to go into the wound, and then the virus or the rabies virus, if present, would tend to inoculate at the site of the bite. So that virus would tend to ascend or to go up into the central nervous system, so it would transverse into the spinal cord and into the brain finally. So once it reaches the brain, so it would further descend down to cause all the signs and symptoms of rabies, the numbness at the site of the bite. So the patient would go into a furious state, which 70% of the patients would manifest with rabies infection, would manifest as a furious type of rabies.
Be prevented. First thing you should do is when you get bitten or licked by an animal is to wash that area with soap and water. Then after that, apply alcohol and put your, example, the betadine or any antiseptic. And of course, next thing is you have to go and visit your doctor or the animal bite centers where vaccination will have to be given.
How is rabies transmitted? What is the correct way to treat an animal bite? Find out the answers tonight on MedTalk.
And joining us tonight is Dr. Emelinda Lopez, Rabies Focal Person, Animal Health and Welfare Division of the Bureau of Animal Industry. Also joining us tonight is Dr. Endinyon Irvin Tan, an adult infectious disease specialist at the Research Institute for Tropical Medicine, or IITM. You may join the discussion by calling our hotline at 548-4678. Good evening, doctors. Welcome to the show.
Good evening.
How would you want to be addressed, Dr. Lopez?
Yes, just call me Doc Minnie.
Doc Minnie and Dr. Tan?
Andy, Dr. Andy.
Okay, Doc Minnie and Doc Andy. Okay. Tonight, it's all about understanding rabies. So first, what is rabies?
Okay, rabies is a viral disease, and it is transmitted by the bite of an infected dog. It is a disease